Okay, we are live for another Ovadia Heart Health telemedicine live stream with our guest, Michelle Hurn. I'm delighted to have the opportunity to talk to Michelle. Um, Michelle, for anyone that isn't following her, she's on social media. She's been at a lot of conferences, and I've heard her present. She's an author. She has written the book. She's a registered dietitian, and she's written the book, The Dieticians Dilemma. She's going to talk to us about some of the other projects that she's been working on. Um, so I can't wait to get started on this. Before we start, I have to put up our disclaimer that just lets everyone that's listening today know that anything that we talk about today um, is provided for educational and informational purposes only, not a substitute for professional advice or treatment by a licensed healthcare provider. Um, and you're advised to seek the care of a qualified doctor or medical professional when undertaking any changes to nutrition, diet, or fitness, including anything we talk about today. If you'd like any additional information from Ovadia Heart Health, you can reach out to us at team@ifixhearts.com. Or if you ever want to schedule a consult or book an appointment with our metabolic health consultant, you can go to ifixhearts.com/talk. And with that, Michelle, I want to hear what you've been up to. I know you are working on so many different things right now. I've had the opportunity to hear you speak at the Symposium for Metabolic Health put on by Low Carb USA and the Society of Metabolic Health Practitioners. You've got quite an interesting story, which you document in your book so well, the Dieticians Dilemma, and you definitely have run into issues with mainstream medicine, which so many of us on this journey have. So give a little background as to how you got where you are, what led to your book, and then we can go further and see what you're working on lately.
Yeah, I'll give you the Reader's Digest version. I had a very serious eating disorder when I was 12. I was diagnosed with anorexia nervosa at the age of 12. I was, 5 feet tall, 57 and a half pounds. Went to inpatient treatment, was there for 2 months. Immediately put on the standard American diet, fed a 24-hour tube feeding. And back then, the main ingredients for tube feeding were soy protein, maltodextrin, corn syrup, canola oil. And so I immediately was told too, like most people don't really recover from eating disorders. If you do survive, and, the doctor actually told my parents I had a very minimal chance of survival at that time. My kidney labs, heart labs, things were not looking very good. You're going to deal with this your whole life. You're going to have, the anxiety, depression, racing thoughts around food. One doctor told me it was possible I wouldn't grow anymore. Like I said, I was only 5 feet tall at that time. And, for the most part, they were correct. I did become weight restored, which I'm incredibly grateful for. But throughout my entire adolescence and into adulthood, I constantly suffered with anxiety, depression, struggled with what should I eat? I was constantly one of those people that was thinking about food, tracking calories, writing everything down, obsessing about it. I dealt with pretty severe suicidal ideation, got worse as I became older. And, I wanted to become a dietitian because I had this intuition that there was something I could do to help my mind. I was put on different medications and, especially as a young person, those actually made things worse. Later, I know they came out with, oh yeah, you shouldn't take Paxil. That can actually cause suicidal ideation. But through the gamut of things and, the few medications that did seem to help, had horrific side effects. I remember being in college and like falling asleep, and I know that happens during lectures, but just like couldn't even stay awake because I was just so fatigued and tired, right? And so to become a dietitian, you get your 4-year degree and then you get into an internship. And during my internship, there were just things that didn't really make sense. For example, we'd go into a room with somebody with type 2 diabetes. And my preceptor would say, okay, we're going to teach them to eat carbohydrates consistently throughout the day so they can dose their medication, their insulin, consistently throughout the day. And I would just ask questions. I was like, oh, I thought their blood sugar was high, like diabetes, right? So we should teach them to eat less carbs, right? And I was kind of pegged as this like difficult dietetic student. We went to the room with somebody who had been in a car accident. And I remember flipping over the tube feeding and being like, oh my God, look at this. This is the same formula I was fed when I was 12. I was 24 at the time. I'm 41 now, by the way. And it's still the same nonsense. It's corn syrup, soy protein, all these highly inflammatory, very highly processed, not very bioavailable ingredients. And I was just told, oh, Michelle, it's all about protein. It's all about calories. It doesn't matter the quality. And, as a dietitian, we know the Academy of Nutrition, which is the governing board of all dietitians, is heavily sponsored by processed foods, by General Mills, by Coca-Cola, by Pepsi, by Frito-Lay. And clearly that influences our education. But, you're young. You're like, okay, this is, I'm going to teach people how to eat more whole grains, more vegetables, more fruit. And I worked in acute care and I just saw the cycle of sickness. People would come in with type 2 diabetes. And then, a few months it was an infection, an amputation, and now they're going into kidney failure. And you just start to become jaded because you're just being told, oh, they're not following the guidelines. They're not doing what we tell them to do. If they would just do what we tell them to do, they would be okay. And for the most part, my patients really seem to be trying to do, and we're, as dietitians, we're always taught moderation too. Oh, don't tell them not to have carbs or not to have sugar. That's dangerous thinking. That's bad thinking, right? Oh gosh. But it wasn't really until 2019 when I lost my own health. I was trying to qualify for the Olympic trials and the marathon. I became a runner as well, a distance runner, and my health just fell off a cliff. And, I wasn't recovering well. I reached out to a few different dietitians, sports dietitians. They all told me I needed to eat more carbohydrates. And at that time, I was eating 350, almost 400 grams of carbs. Oh, and anyone who's not familiar, that is a lot of carbohydrates, right? I'm not, I'm 5'7", not a relatively lean human. And my health went from bad to really bad. I had to call out of work because I was having panic attacks. I was crying. I was literally driving to work once too. And I just broke out in a cold sweat. Like I had to pull over. It was terrifying. And I'm like, what is wrong with me? And finally, we had a really rough day at the hospital. We had a young patient pass. I came home early, fell asleep on the couch, woke up at like 2 a.m. and it just felt like my body was on fire. And I was just out of answers, Chris. I feel like a lot of people get to this point where I was doing what the medical community told me to do. I had taken all the prescriptions. I tried a bunch of natural. I tried some weird stuff. I was eating all these healthy whole grains, quote unquote. And, at like 2:30 a.m, I ended up driving to the gas station, getting a bunch of ice and putting it in the bathtub and just bawling my eyes out in an ice bath. And that was my pivotal turning point. It's when my wife came in and was like, you know what, maybe we should do something different. And I thought my running was over. I thought, okay, I'm done. I'm never going to run again. I'm in pain. This is not working. This is not going well. I had no idea. If you told me at that moment, like, wow, this is going to be a pivotal changing point of your life, I would not have believed you. But because I wasn't running, I started to explore low carbohydrate diets.
What was the trigger that caused you to start thinking maybe low carb was something that could provide you with answers?
Yeah, that's a great question. I intuitively knew that carbohydrates did not make me feel well, right? Like mental health issues run in my family. I'm very fortunate. I've never had issues with obesity or diabetes or heart disease. That doesn't run in my family, but mental health. My mom is bipolar. My grandma was bipolar type 2. And I could even tell as a very young person that when I ate a lot of sugar or carbs, like I just felt kind of on edge. Mm-hmm. And, throughout my eating disorder years, when I was literally eating nothing, although obviously that wasn't good for me weight wise, I was calm. I was very much more calm. So I thought, like, what if I just eat more protein and just a lot less carbohydrates? And I'm embarrassed to admit that I was genuinely afraid. My education, it was so ingrained in me that I needed carbohydrates to live, to thrive, that if I ate a lot of fat, that could potentially be bad for my heart. But I was so sick, I think sometimes you get to a point where you have nothing to lose. And I thought, like, I'll just adopt a ketogenic diet for 30 days. And that kind of led me to stumbling upon the carnivore diet. And I was like, you know what, let's do that for 30 days. Let's just eat meat and fat. And, because my theory to myself was, well, all the protein, maybe that will help with my muscles. Maybe I won't be quite as hungry. And of course, my wife and I argued about it. She's like, this is dangerous. This is eating disorder. This is going to set you back. And finally, she was just like, whatever, do it. You're going to quit in a week or so and we'll go back to a normal diet.
So what happened? How quick did things start to change? How quick did things start to transform and improve?
Well, the first few days were terrible. I would tell anybody who, and you got to remember too, I was eating a very high amount of carbohydrates. I went from, 400 at that time, almost 500 to zero. And I would tell anybody who decides to do that, make sure you supplement with electrolytes. We also, in our house growing up, we didn't use salt. We had that fake salt, that like potassium, light salt or whatever. And so I didn't do any electrolytes. I wasn't drinking enough fluid. So I was miserable for about 3.5 days. And then thankfully, you get on some forums, get online, and oh God, I need salt. I need some. That helped a lot. So that's always my, I try to get that out to people. But within about a week, it was the first time I noticed. I was actually in a meeting. I was still working in acute care at this time. And my coworker was getting kind of fidgety. And she was like, Michelle, I got to grab a snack. I'm starving. And I remember being like, Christy, we're going to eat lunch at noon. I'm okay. And she goes, Michelle, it's almost 2. And never in my life had I gone more than 2 or 3 hours without eating. I always had a granola bar with me, a piece of fruit, or at least I knew, okay, well, there's a coffee shop here. I can get something, I had just gone like almost at that thing. I think it was like 6 or 7 hours. And I remember like sitting with a patient and they were telling me their life story. And normally I was very agitated. I gotta go. And I was just kind of calm. I'm like, this is really odd. This is kind of nice. And then it was the third week that Karina, my wife, she beat me home. And when I walked in, she said, hey, I want to talk to you. And if you're married or you have a partner, normally that's not a good thing. It's like somebody died or you're in trouble. And I went and sat next to her and she said, I don't know if I like how you're eating, but this is the best your anxiety has been in the 11 years that I've known you. And we were both just like, what is going on? And she's a scientist. I'm a dietitian. We both are working at institutions. So we had access to clinical trials. So we're like, let's dig up everything we can find on keto, on carnivore, on any keywords, And I was angry, Chris. I was so mad. I was like, how are there this many clinical trials on ketogenic diets? And it was never taught to me as a dietitian. Like there's a 1-page thing when you're going through your dietetics, like maybe for epilepsy, learn about that later, but it was type 2 diabetes. And I was seeing it was anti-inflammatory. Oh my God, there's cancer trials, anti-cancer, and I just kept going. And I got so excited and I printed them all out and I highlighted them, and Karina and I go over them at night. And I put together this whole thing. I was so excited. I set up a meeting with the clinical director of my hospital. And I was like, I think we can actually change healthcare here in the hospispital.
And I bet they embraced it wholeheartedly.
They said, yes, you're going to start a new thing. You're going to lead the chart. No, they said they smiled and were like, it's cute. Sounds good. But no, absolutely not. I was told like, hey, for our insurance purposes, we have to do the dietary guidelines. It's anything in our hospital. It has to be the little form that's stamped, Legacy Health. That's all you can teach. And I said, well, since I have this trial, can I present what you say, and can I also present this as an option? Absolutely not. And they were very clear that wouldn't be tolerated. And so, yeah, that's hence starting to write the book, The Dieticians Dilemma.
So how long did your career there last after that run-in?
Not very long. And so, now I had an ethical dilemma. Like many people experience this, right? When you do the low carb or keto nutrition, is like, you see how quickly your health can shift. And it just makes sense, right? Oh my gosh, I get my insulin down. I stabilize my blood glucose. I feel better. And certainly for type 2 diabetics, like I couldn't believe that we would still teach the consistent carb diet. And so, I started I will neither confirm nor deny that I perhaps went into patient rooms and said, hey, I'm going to chart this, but would you like me to teach you this? I actually, it's possible that a patient told a nurse and I got suspended, but thankfully, I don't know if it's thankfully or not, that's right before the COVID-19 pandemic, because I discovered low carb end of 2019, and then COVID hit. So I lost all my dietitian hours, and they put me they said, don't worry, we're going to put you in the call center. We keep your same dietitian salary. Don't worry about it. But you can't do any nutritional counseling. You're just going to have people call in to order food, because we did a room service, and you just take their order. So I'd have type 2 diabetics call in and be like, okay, I have 90 grams of carbs per meal. I'm going to have the chocolate cake. And so as you can imagine, I did not last long. I would go home just crying. And, Karina and I, we just made a plan, like, when can I get out of here? when can I financially leave here? And as soon as I could, I did. I took an incredible pay cut to go do a manual labor job. It is funny, I'm at that point, I'm 36 and here I am working in food service, but it was great. It gave me the opportunity to write my book and start this advocacy.
How did the book change things for you? I enjoyed reading it, and I know a lot of people probably you appeal to a lot of different types of people. I mean, your experience with anorexia and some of the mental health issues. Um, Definitely, there's a lot, a lot of people that struggle with those things, and even like, I mean, today we're seeing like a lot more attention on um, metabolic therapies for mental health. Seems like you were kind of getting in at the beginning of that. How did the book change things for you?
Yeah, and I'm so grateful for like the Bazookies, and the Bazooki Foundation has been so good to me. And obviously Dr. Palmer and Dr. Eid, or Dr. Palmer is my inspiration for so much of that, the mental health chapters. But yeah, I just wanted to write about, in the book, we talk about type 2 diabetes, mental health disorders, including major depression, eating disorders, which was so controversial at the time and still is to some degree, and sarcopenia, heart disease, and really diving into like plants versus animals, because there's a movement, to make people eat more plants, less meat. And I just saw that's a catastrophe for human health and just for the human body and metabolism. So yeah, it was my goal to take everything that I had learned, there's 151 cited articles, got a bunch of testimonies from the community. And I wanted to share my story because I felt like there's still so much shame around eating disorders, people, whether that's binge eating disorder, anorexia, bulimia, and just kind of taking away that shame. Like, hey, this sucks. And the treatment for these diseases are terrible. Like the recovery rates are so low. And if you go to Texas or California, they're completely different. There's no standard of care for this. So I wanted to just talk about a different option. I think I remember when I talked to Dr. Palmer, like that was his goal, was like, I want to present this as an option to people, this ketogenic therapy. So yeah, when I first wrote the book, it was kind of this leap of faith, because once again, I was I was coming off making a lot less money in the clinical setting, and it's not cheap to write a book, and Bezos makes a lot more off my book than I do. But I was so grateful that about a few months into writing it, I got contacted by this doctor I hadn't heard much about, but people are like, oh, you got to talk to him. His name's Dr. Barry, and he wants to talk to you. And that changed my life. Ken Berry and I are now friends. And, he brought me on his channel, and, that kind of helped get the book out and open some speaking opportunities for me. And, I was very fortunate that I got my second book, The Fox Family Food Fight, where little Freddie Fox gets type 2 foxabetes, and the Foxitition isn't particularly helpful, was fully funded. And so now I get to use any proceeds from that to fund my charity project.
So you're reaching children, I guess, with that book, right? So um, you've really made it important to you to reach people with needs that aren't going to be met. How did the Fox book? Let's see. Give the full title so people can
The
find it.
Fox Family Food Fight.
I've got it written down here. The Fox Family Food Fight. I haven't gotten that book in my hands yet, but I assume that people can just buy that on Amazon.
Yes, that's on Amazon. That's a quick read, Chris. That'll take you about 7 minutes.
Okay, I wish I still had little kids to read it to, but I got to say that my adult kids have learned a lot from people like you and other people in the low carb community. I think that all of my kids are eating a lot better now than they were when they were growing up with me buying the groceries, unfortunately, because I was still forcing on them the things that I learned from mainstream nutrition and mainstream medicine. While we're on that, can you what is the reason that you think that mainstream nutrition is so adamant about sticking to the guidelines as they are currently constructed, and so resistant to even offering therapeutic carbohydrate reduction as an option for people, so many of whom it would open up new possibilities for all sorts of benefits in their lives?
Yeah, I think it's definitely at least twofold. The very first thing that came to my mind And I hate to be negative, but the truth is that keeping people sick is so profitable. It is, however profitable people think it is, whatever the statistics say, I would say double it. The latest statistic I saw for what they were making on just pharmaceuticals for type 2 diabetes was 2022 was over 420 billion. And I don't even think, I'm sure it's more than that between all the kickbacks and things. And, they say kickbacks don't happen. Anyone who's worked in healthcare can smile and nod. Sure, they don't. So if we shift the guidelines to, because we've seen this, you and I talked briefly offline, I've had people with blood sugars, A1C of 13 that was able to have complete remission. A1C now, 5.4 in 6 months. People with A1C of 8 or 9, 5.6, one guy was 6, so still pre-diabetic, but he'll get there, very quickly on low carbohydrate diets. We are healing people with food, and the Bazookies, they did a 6-week trial for bipolar disorder. And you can see shifts in the brain with MRI with just food. That's incredible to me. If a drug did that, it would make national news,
Yeah.
So, but if you just use food, these industries are so powerful. There's a reason they sponsor the American Heart Association and the American Diabetes Association and the Academy of Nutrition, because dietitians say moderation. So we say it's okay to eat their chips, and when they get in cereal and granola bars, and when they get sick, pharma says, oh, we'll just give you these pills, and that, manages the disease. But now they have stomach problems from that. Well, that's okay. We'll give you another pill for that. Oh, now it's causing this. Oh, bummer. So it's just the most profitable industry possible. Yep. And then beyond that, though, I do think there's a cognitive dissonance, that people, if you're asking dietitians who've been practicing for 20 years and doctors for 30 years, like, hey, I'm sorry, you've been doing this wrong. Like, there's a lot of ego there, and I know myself, my good friend, who's on the ADS with me, Shannon, like we are very open to saying, like, we were wrong. You don't know what you don't know. We gave terrible advice. We gave the advice we were taught, but not everybody is willing to be humble like that.
You just mentioned the ADS. Speaking of the ADS, I would bet you that some of the people listening are not aware of the new, it's a not-for-profit, right? Mm-hmm. Yep. The American Diabetes Society, and you're on the board. What is your role on the American Diabetes Society?
Yeah, I'm the head dietitian.
Head dietitian. Yep. Okay, yes. And tell me, give me your elevator pitch for what the American Diabetes Society is, and how it's different from the previously and currently existing ADA, the American Diabetes Association.
Yeah, Dr. Berry reached out to me and was like, do you want to do something really cool? I was like, sure. What are we going to do? But no, I feel like the ADS, so the American Diabetes Society, our goal was basically to be kind of the opposite of the American Diabetes Association. So, our goal, like, let's get some of the best minds out there. So it's, Dr. Eric Westman, Ben Bickman, Ken Berry, Tony Hampton, and Mariella Glantz. So all people who have incredible, published studies, really understand the nuances of insulin resistance and low carbohydrate nutrition and animal-based nutrition. And then there's myself and 3 other dietitians. So it's me, Shannon Davis, Temple Stewart, and Shanna Husson. And once again, all of us who really understand low carbohydrate nutrition, we understand the research, and we've seen how it can impact people. So the American Diabetes Association actually doesn't have a stance on nutrition. Isn't that fascinating? They have no stance. That is their stance, is we don't prescribe any diet. If you look at the recipes, they're often made with sugar, fruit, and carbohydrates. I saw that the other day, one of the recipes had 60 grams of carbs per serving. And then they give you advice and tips on how to manage your, and their slogan is connected for life. And the American Diabetes Society, we don't want to be connected for life. We want you to get out of here. We want you to reverse your type 2 diabetes. We don't just believe, we are science-based. That's the biggest difference, is the American Diabetes Association has not stayed up with the science. The science clearly shows you can reverse type 2 diabetes. If people aren't, Dr. Berry always says, if you're not comfortable with that, say remission. You're putting it in remission. Your A1C is now under 5.7. So you no longer have type 2 diabetes. And we also want to make it we want to make it simple. Chris, I had somebody tell me once at actually a new employee orientation, and I always remember this, that she said, if you have a disease, let's say you just got diagnosed with type 2 diabetes or cardiovascular failure or, stage 3 kidney disease or something, she said, nobody says, I'm in a crisis, challenge me. And I feel like we do that with nutrition. It's like, track this, measure this, less this, more, so we want to make it simple. Eat these foods, don't eat these foods, the end, and of course we're going to have recipes and stuff, but I think if we can help the public in general, just very easy to read articles, very basic recipes, making things super simple. And of course, if you want to understand the science, we'll have links to the science as well. Then yeah, you're going to heal. I've seen it. I've seen it every day working at Ona Health. So that's what we want to do. So it's really starting with just, basic education. And then of course, our goal will also be to, do more public policy and advocacy and, starting in the US, maybe worldwide, if we can keep growing.
So from where you are sitting in the organization right now, have you seen any sort of a response, positive or negative, to this new organization that's on the scene and that's offering advice that's different from the mainstream? I would imagine that at some point, if you haven't already experienced pushback, that might come. But has there been any resistance from anyone?
It's been overwhelmingly positive,
Great.
As a 501c3, like I was so impressed that, and that's another big difference from us in the American Diabetes Association is we're not taking sponsorship from Lilly's or Pfizer or the companies that make diabetic drugs. So, but we've had a lot of, they raised quite a bit of money to get it going.
Yeah.
And it's all just people donating, saying, we believe in this. We want to see a paradigm shift. I have had several dietitians send me, we'll call them less than kind emails saying that there's lots of ways to cure diabetes. You shouldn't be pushing low carbohydrate nutrition. One of the, goofy things people like to say is it's highly restrictive. It's going to cause eating disorders. And it's very silly because it's like, there's nothing that could be further than the truth than eating in a way that aligns with human physiology and healing that does not cause eating disorders. So, and interestingly, generally those people that come at me with like negative things aren't interested. Like, hey, I hear what you're saying. Can I show you the data? Can I send you this paper? Can we review it together? Would you like to hop on a Zoom call and go over it? And they just kind of want to yell and shout, and I don't got time for that. So,
Yeah, well, it's, I think once you've experienced the difference that eliminating those problematic foods, which, for me were sugar and refined carbs and then grains and seed oils. Once I eliminated those from my diet, that was the difference. And a traditional diet that's focused on, minimizing fat as the primary objective and then restricting calories, seems like a miserable way to live, at least in my experience. And by making that change, you said that you were angry when you figured out how low carb could work for you. And I can only imagine with the added issue of mental health issues, because, I was 278 pounds at my worst. I didn't feel like I was, spiraling from a health standpoint yet, but I certainly wasn't happy and I was definitely headed in the wrong direction. But yeah, it's kind of natural to feel that you've been let down by a system that doesn't allow you to pursue something that could literally transform your life. And, I was fortunate to stumble upon it, but now I see, for me, it's been 7 years. I see that there's a whole community of people like you and Dr. Barry and Dr. Ovadia and the list goes on and on. It's just that there's a lot of pushback from people that don't want to accept that as viable. The one thing you were talking about the bazookies and the mental health. I noticed that you were a co-author on a case series using ketogenic diet in the treatment of severe anorexia nervosa. Is there anything about that is a highlight that you'd like to mention?
Yeah, I was so grateful. Nick Norwitz and I wrote that paper together. And, because like I said earlier, there's this I don't want to know if it's dogma, but that if you restrict food, like if you restrict a food group, that's eating disorder. When I was in eating disorder treatment, it was all foods can fit. You need to be able to eat cupcakes and broccoli and chicken breast and whatever else. And what we've overwhelmingly found is that it's not effective. There was a great paper that was written that was talking about how especially people, it was specifically anorexia, would go into treatment, gain weight rapidly, come out of treatment, lose weight rapidly, and then repeat the cycle. And when I was researching for my book, statistically, about 20% of people who die of anorexia, it's not from the low weight or, the physical ailment. They actually take their own life. And I remember feeling that, if you read my book, like I was so grateful when the doctor told my parents, like, hey, I don't know if she's going to make it. Because I was like, oh, thank God, it's almost over. Like, you're suffering so much. So I deeply get that. But, how I like to think about, the mental health with eating disorders, and, that paper is specifically with anorexia, it's like epilepsy. Babies are born with epilepsy. They didn't do anything wrong. They just have a genetic abnormality in the brain where they don't process and utilize glucose very well. So what do? They're fed a ketogenic formula, or breast milk is ketogenic, and they stop seizing. And what we found overwhelmingly is that people who follow, struggling with anorexia or bulimia, Dr. Satish Shabani wrote the great case series on binge eating disorder. When they were fed ketogenic diets, several things happen. And, one of the theories, just like epilepsy, is finally you're fueling the brain with a substrate it can use. It's not using glucose well, but now it's able to function off ketones and fatty acids. So all of a sudden your brain starts working. Also, curiously, they really good paper written about like the gray matter of your brain shrinks when you starve, yourself from like with anorexia or just starvation. But very good data can actually regenerate. But are we sure we want to regenerate it with canola oil? With the highly inflammatory oils from tube feeding and other things, right? And so what we overwhelmingly found, and there's another paper I read about my book, and I feel like my 6-year-old niece could tell you this. People that have binged and purged and people that have starved themselves actually have pretty severe GI damage. Like the gastrointestinal epithelium is damaged, like duh, right? Well, when they're fed a lot of sugar and flour and even fiber, it's like a scrub brush, you're taking to a damaged system. It's not ideal. But when they were fed, fat and protein, things that completely absent of fiber, but really high bioavailability, and bioavailability just means my body can break it down and use it well, they healed. They did much better. And so we wanted to highlight people, this case series, people with long-term recovery. And, there's one woman in there in particular who was just, I want to say on like death's door, right? Like ready, really, really poorly off. So yeah, we kind of are challenging the paradigm that you have to eat all foods all the time. And so is this paper saying that everybody needs to be keto or carnivore with an eating disorder? No, not necessarily, but we're saying, can we shift you and get you metabolically healthy and potentially metabolically flexible again, right? To where you're burning a high level of fat. And then maybe you can add some carbohydrates to your tolerance.
So that's fascinating. And, I'm just, like there's just so much going on right now with all aspects of mental health and just the idea that people are doing studies and learning more. And I would imagine that if that continues, we're going to learn a lot in the next decade or
Oh yeah,
couple of decades. Fascinating. And clearly, I think, I personally know a number of people who are like success stories already in the area of mental health. In fact, we had Eric Rogers, who I think was on our live stream either last week or the week before. And, he has a fascinating personal story. And, these are just regular people that want to have an option to try something else other than just prescriptions, which is a perfect lead in to asking you about your thoughts on GLP-1s. And are they going to solve our nationwide crisis on obesity and metabolic disease? And what's your thoughts on those?
Yeah, I think about GLP-1s kind of in a similar category of giving type 2 diabetics insulin. Like you are putting a Band-Aid on a problem and you're only going to make it worse. To me, I've never seen, and I worked in the acute care setting for over a decade. I never saw a doctor go and talk to patients and say, hey, look, We got two options here. You're type 2 diabetic. You can be on this low carb diet. It's going to suck for like a week, but then you're going to be fine. You're going to heal. It's going to, whatever. Or we're going to give you insulin. If we give you insulin, you can keep eating whatever you want. But, in a month, 6 months, we'll cut off your leg. You're going to have heart disease, kidney failure. It kind of blows. But what do you want to do? I never saw somebody explain what these things do. And the thing is, we don't have long-term data. I mean, they just came out with the 2-year data on GLP-1s, and they're not good. Dr. Bickman just did a talk on this, They're finding that, yeah, maybe it shuts down that hunger noise, but guess what else it shuts down? Everything else. People are not feeling anything. They're dealing with depression. They can't feel joy anymore. They're losing like sexual desire. That's horrible. Their stomach, they're having gastroparesis. Food is not moving through their stomach. They're having permanent nausea. A guy was blind. And I know that was one rare case report, but my goodness, we know we can naturally increase our body's own GLP-1 production with protein, fat, and fiber. And there's also other supplements and things you can use that are natural. Dr. Bickman is on the board of Unicity, a yerba mate product. It's like a tea that actually will, increase your body's own ability to produce GLP-1. So taking these things, to me, I truly believe, Chris, in like 5 years, and certainly in 10, it's going to be like, hey, as a dietitian, like, hey, this person took Ozempic, so their stomach doesn't work very well, but we're such a quick fix society. It's like, oh, because it will help you lose weight. Like that is very clear. But we're also showing that weight is muscle and bone primarily, which is not also good in a society that is under muscled and tends to be over fat. And, bone density is kind of a big thing. Most of us want a skeleton when we're, old. So these things terrify me. And, you have people say, well, they, like I said, they can help, maybe whatever, but I just,
you just said something that I'm very curious about. You used the word joy and how it relates to, how important it is and how the drugs might steal a person's joy. It reminds me of when I was going through cancer treatments about 6 years ago, and midway through the chemo and radiation, I completely lost my sense of taste, to the point where food absolutely lost. It wasn't just the taste, but the combination of how I felt and the fact that I lost my sense of taste. All joy just vanished with respect to food, eating, and it was, a very short period of time, relatively speaking, a matter of a couple of months for me. But when I started hearing about what GLP-1s do and having talked to some people that are on them, I do worry that there could be effects that haven't been fully explored. So even though, they may be useful in certain situations in conjunction with something else for a certain period of time, but I do think that if they're just prescribed in massive quantities to everybody that's overweight, we are going to learn the hard way
Yeah, I saw one quote that I'm going to use frequently now, and is that you can't cheat biochemistry. You just can't. You can try. It's like you want to have rapid weight loss. Yeah, sure, you're going to gain it back. The most success you're ever going to have is the most boring you're ever going to do. It's time on task. It's consistency. It's every single day. But we're such a quick fix society. Telling someone, hey, give me 3 months. Let's low carb diet. Let's, and maybe, and it's going to take time. It may take much longer than that. But to say, you know what, give me a month. Let me give you this shot and we're going to knock it out. Oh, that's all I have to do. Sweet. But once again, we're not explaining the side of it. Like that doesn't work. If somebody tells you that, that's cheating biochemistry, and that will always come back around to bite you in the ass. And I hear you. Are there very specific circumstances like, hey, it's kind of like if somebody comes into the ER and their blood sugar is 600, we don't need to talk about a low carb diet. We need to give you insulin now so you don't die, So if somebody is like on death's door, like 700 pounds, well, maybe it's this opportunity cost here where we get you on this for a very short period of time. Perhaps I could explore that, but that's not how they're being used right now. Considering that I saw the quarterly earning for Ozempic was, I want to say it was in the billions, their quarterly earnings.
So I see on X and other social media platforms, some of the obesity medicine doctors, board certified obesity medicine doctors, who are very much of the mindset that lifestyle changes are not sustainable. They quote statistics and studies that show that over the long term that most people don't succeed, and therefore their attitude is like, well, we'll just prescribe something. Um,
Sure.
Now, clearly, there there are issues. Part of the problem with lifestyle changes related to food is that the instructions that are being given aren't always useful. So if you, I mean, technically, if you starve yourself, you're likely to lose weight, but that's a
True.
miserable, very hard thing to control. Most people have tried many times, and I know for myself, I I've lost as much as 55 pounds through the old calorie restriction, white knuckle, miserable, losing muscle and fatigue, having shivers and being cold. And, it didn't last very long at all. And then in contrast, when I learned the right way to eat, where I was eating foods that provided satiety and the proper nutrient balance and all the protein that I needed, and I mixed that with more activity and maybe build some muscles for some health benefits, all of a sudden I noticed everything was working the way, almost as if the body was designed to regulate itself, for the first time in my life. So I just wonder if you have any thoughts about, well, I want to get your thoughts on what a person who's been struggling, um, would you give a person any advice? um, I have a brother who's 51 years old, and he's a type 2 diabetes patient, and he's lost the function of his kidneys,
Mm.
and he's on kidney dialysis 3 days a week. And when you compare the amount of distress that's Im- imparted in his life as a result of this, and then you think back to, wow, would it have been maybe easier to change the diet, 15, 20 years ago? Um, it probably would have been easier, all things considered. I mean, he deals with being unable to hold down a full-time job and having to get himself to dialysis treatment 3 times a week. So what kind of advice would you give to someone with your professional background, especially with somebody that's had success as a distance runner, and you've had success, incorporating lifestyle changes into your own life, but then you also work with others. And just curious, because we at Ovadia Heart Health, we have patients who are actively trying to incorporate lifestyle changes in their life. And then we have a lot of people that follow Dr. Ovadia on social media and have read his book. And just curious as to your
Yeah.
perspective on what are the things that are most predictive of long-term success.
Yeah, and I also want to just validate that, yeah, a lot of people have failed because they were given terrible advice. Of course, they weren't able to follow lifestyle advice that was, these very high carbohydrate, low fat diets do not align with human physiology. Most people or understand and appreciate that different species have different species specific diets. For example, you feed a tortoise different than you feed a dog, right? Like nobody's going to argue that. Like, okay, yeah, duh, of course. Yeah. But when it comes to humans, it's like, oh, they can eat whatever they want. They can eat Pop-Tarts, Frappuccinos, or, oh, you should probably eat some whole wheat toast. And so of course you failed. So do not blame yourself. Like we blame the patient so much. Like, first I want to get rid of that. Like, this is not your fault, but it is your responsibility. Now
Mm.
I tell people, I can give you every single tool. I need you to execute regardless of your circumstance. I need you to execute when it's cold, when it's hot, when your husband's mean or your wife's mean, when you're angry, when you're stressed, when your boss sucks. Like, I need you to execute because if you do that, you will change your life. Everything, the human body and brain, Chris, their capacity to heal is tremendous. It's greater than anyone has ever allowed you to believe. Like, if you had told me, like, back when I was struggling, like, I had an active plan to take my own life in 2017. If you had said, Michelle, we're going to take your right arm, we're going to amputate it, but your mental health is going to improve, I would have been like, take it. Like, I don't want to feel like I want to kill myself.
Mm.
But and I apologize if this feels a little dramatic, but it was that bad. But that's what shifting your brain chemistry does. That's what eating a diet aligned in human physiology does. And the people that I work with, the most successful, are the people, you don't have to be perfect. Nobody is. But you have to be consistent and you have to be willing. You have to be willing to face your demons. You have to say, like, look, I'm addicted to this. I don't want to give up sugar and carbs, but I'm going to do this. I'm going to try this. Because it's going to be hard at first. It was awful. Those first few days, I like wanted to claw my eyes out. I was like, oh my God, I just want some sugar. But once you get past that, everything in your life gets better. And the food you eat is amazing. I've been doing this since 2019 and I love it. Who doesn't like cheese and burger patties and an astronomical amount of butter? That's cool. That's great. Who doesn't like sleeping well and having good relationships and being able to show up authentically and gratefully in your life and for your family? It's a really beautiful way to live. So that's what I would tell people though. If you're like, God, I've tried so many things and everything fails, I'd say, let me teach you. And I think it's important that we teach patients. Like, how often does a dietitian say, like, let me teach you about insulin resistance? Let's look at these different macronutrients. Can I show you what they do to your blood sugar? Can I actually pull out a graph here? Can I give you this handout, this 2-page handout that actually is going to say, eat this, don't eat this, and let me guide you. Let me help you. Let's find out what you actually like to eat. And we're going to focus on that. And you're going to go all in, and the people who do that, I tell you what, like I've been amazed and humbled by the success I've seen with my type 2 diabetics, with my eating disorder patients. And, I work with a gamut of people. So it's very interesting to work with, very obese type 2 diabetes and very underweight, adolescents. And, obviously the diet plans are a bit nuanced, depending on their goals and current metabolic health. But man, healing is possible. It truly is.
Very powerful, Michelle. I think that everybody that is struggling with like type 2 diabetes or other metabolic disease, failing kidneys, whatever, should like listen to what you just said. Because I mean, now you reminded me back of my brother who, it's like, why is he able to make such a huge sacrifice now 3 days a week for several hours each day, when the sacrifice he would have had to make if he had known what to do earlier would have been so much easier. And I, like when I got my cancer diagnosis, the oncologist like sat me down and said, basically, here's what you've got to do. And if you don't do it, you're going to die. Mm-hmm. And the process, it was 6 weeks of daily treatments, which involved driving an hour each way and then getting radiation shot into my neck every single day until my throat was raw and bleeding. And yet I did it without asking any questions. We did our due diligence but it was like, oh, that's what we have to do for me to survive. But when the urgency seems not to be there for someone that's in the early stages of type 2 diabetes, it's like, I guess because it's a longer, more drawn out, slow process maybe than maybe cancer could be, or somehow it just doesn't register. It's like, well, I'll just take some medication and kind of manage the symptoms. Is that frustrating?
Yes. Well, and it's amazing. And that's just the type of society we are, though. Like I write an example in my book, like if you saw your child, say you have a 2-year-old child and you saw them about to drink bleach, you would run across the street. You would run in front of a car if you had to knock it out of their hand, because they were going to die. But we'll give them cookies and Coke and all these things that are eventually going to potentially cause metabolic disease, And a lot of times, Mel Robbins says this, that we all think we're the exception. Like, yeah, I've heard that's bad, but whatever. Like, I'm okay. It's like osteoporosis. You don't know until you break a bone. Like, you could be walking around just fine, and all of a sudden you shift, right?
Yep.
So yeah, unfortunately, some of these diseases that take a long time to really manifest as something serious, we now know the damage is being done decades in advance. So, and once again, the people that I've had the most success with treat it with that type of urgency. Like, okay, I have type 2 diabetes. Tell me what to do. I will execute. I have this horrible eating disorder that's controlling every aspect of my life, and I freaking hate it. Like, I'm tired of living like this. Tell me what to do. And once again, I'm not saying that it's magical or it's perfect, whatever, but man, if you can eat in a way that stabilizes your blood glucose, helps your brain function, you have your support, you're consistent. I've continued to say I've seen really tremendous results.
Let's see. We have a few comments. I don't think we have any questions, but I don't. Mark Van says, "Thank you, Michelle." I figured I'd share that with
You
everybody.
should.
Thanks, Mark, for listening. Um, let's see. We have DS111 who says, "This is very interesting and worthwhile to watch. I'm glad Dr. Ovadia keeps the channel moving when he is busy elsewhere." Dr. Ovadia will be doing a live stream later today at 6 o'clock. Um, and let's see, we had one other comment that came in. Elena
Oh,
says, "I've been carnivore for 14 months and I don't have any bipolar symptoms anymore." Well, that's
amazing.
tremendous to hear. Um, so so tell us a little bit about the work that you're doing now, and I would love to hear some highlights, some individual highlights that really keep you going and drive you to continue the work that you do.
Yeah, I feel like two of the biggest things, well, I guess three, some of the biggest things that have been going on in my life. As you said, I'm a long distance runner. So I train for distances over a marathon. So I'm currently training for a 6 hour race. It's just a time race. How far can you run? The course record is a little over 42 miles. So it's my goal to blow that out of the water June 7th. And then I'll do another 50-mile race in the fall. Yeah, the American Diabetes Society, like our main goal this year is just to get off the ground, get our name out there. We have a tremendous social media manager. So, working with her and, we just got a bunch of recipes up on the website and we're going to be doing some fundraising so we can really like dive into 2026 with more advocacy, sending us to conferences. And so that's been really fun. Everybody that's on that board it's all volunteer. So, and we're all like busy, but it's so much fun. I love everybody on there and it's just cool to network and just to help people. I always say like it's my gift of gratitude to give back. And you and I were talking a little bit offline. I started a charity project. It's called just the Protein Project, to where the entire proceeds of the Fox family food fight, and then I cut off a portion of the Dieticians Dilemma too. I get paid through Amazon every month. We have a regenerative farm around Camas, Washington. I live actually in Vancouver, Washington, so right outside of Portland, Oregon. And he does kind of like the imperfect produce thing for me, to where some of the cuts he gets that maybe you can't quite sell at the farmer's market, he'll give them to me for just really reduced costs. And we just give that directly to the food bank. The food bank here in Vancouver can take frozen meat. And I tell people, like, I'm honored if anybody wants to specifically donate to me, but you can also go to your food bank. Like, the need right now is reporting around the state is so high. They're not getting any protein donations anymore. It's just too expensive for restaurants to donate anything, at least here where I live. So if you can donate fresh food, if they take it, if frozen is amazing. If not, canned tuna, canned chicken, like, if you've ever had to get food stamps or food bank, like we did when we were younger, there's a lot of carbs and sugar. So yeah.
Yeah, I've been on numerous food runs to either New York City or the more local city of Poughkeepsie, which is near where I live, and given set up distribution both at homeless shelters and out on the streets at night.
Yeah.
And I see there's a lot of type 2 diabetes patients who are not getting very good care. I mean, people that are sleeping like out on the streets, and you can tell that they have problems with their limbs, and and many of them will pass on eating something, and they'll say, I'm a diabetes patient, I can't have that. And then you see them over at the dessert table grabbing something that is even worse.
Yeah.
And the amount of sugar that's put in the coffee, I mean, like, not 2 or 3 teaspoons, but like half of
Yeah, it's pretty bad.
so there's people that are not getting good nutrients. And so it's really admirable that you're working on that project and spreading the word, as well as the specific project you're working on. But it's prevalent everywhere. People are not getting the protein and the healthy foods that they can eat, and it's always, I guess, less expensive in the short term for people to buy really poor quality foods and just eat junk food. And a lot of people in certain parts of the country are, they don't even have a grocery store within transportation distance of their house. They're going to like dollar stores to buy total junk. I mean,
Yeah.
just eating garbage. So thank you for that. very important. And then, so what you mentioned the running. I mean, I'm always blown away. I mean, you inspire people like me who um, will never have the skill or the talent to run at a fast pace. But I did run a marathon at age 58, and it's
Awesome.
inspired by people like you, like people like Zach Bitter, Brady Homer, people that are true successes in the field, um, who just show what they do on a day in day out basis, and also share the experience with other people. I mean, and allow others to kind of live a little vicariously, and enjoy seeing somebody that's doing it at a high level. You've won some races at the 50-mile range, haven't you? What kind of mile pace are you running when you run 50 miles?
Right around 8-minute pace. It's
Wow.
my goal to break 8 for the 6-hour race. So
Okay. When is that coming up?
June 7th.
All right. Well, and is that, are people able to follow that in any way, shape, or form? Like,
I don't know. I'll have to see if they're gonna do like a live stream on
no,
it.
that'll be
If
cool.
so, I'll put it on my social media for sure.
Awesome. So where's the best place for people to follow you, Michelle?
Yeah, so I'm on social media on Instagram at Run Eat Meet Repeat. I'm on X at Michelle Hurn RD. I'm totally revamping my website, but you can still see my website right now at the dietitiansdilemma.net. I'm always happy to answer any questions. You can email me through there or just hit me up on one of the social media platforms.
Okay, and you mentioned also the American Diabetes Society, which is americandiabetessociety.org.
Yeah.
Um, and I will make sure that all of these links get into the notes at the end. This is going to be available on the iFix Hearts YouTube channel. So all of those links will be there, and we'll also have an article go out that will have the live stream embedded within it. So people will have every way of getting in touch with you, Michelle, on social media, your website, the Diabetes Society. And if anybody wants to reach out to ifixhearts.com, we have a team of, Dr. Ovadia is a cardiologist and medical doctor, and nurse practitioner Lisa Simmons is available. You want to set up an appointment to talk to anyone on our team, the place to go is ifixhearts.com/talk. And is there anything else, Michelle, that you'd like to leave us with? I mean, you're so inspirational. And I know that people that are listening to this are going to definitely take away some really important things. But if there's anything else you'd like to add before we wrap this up, I'd love to hear it.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like I already said it, but I do truly believe that the human body and brain have a tremendous capacity to heal, and in so many people, if it's not you, maybe somebody dealing with like major depression or anxiety or obesity that's just feels pretty hopeless. Like they seem hopeless. Like I hope you share this with them. And yeah, I just feel really grateful.
Great. Well, thank you very much for taking the time. We really appreciate it. And as I said, all of this will be available. It's going to we've got over 700 people on the stream right now, but the numbers are going to go up rapidly once this is on YouTube. So thanks everybody who came in and listened today and watched. And stay tuned for our next live stream. We have pretty much every week. So thanks again, Michelle, and we'll look forward to seeing you around.
All right. Thanks so much.
All right. Take care.
Bye.